So almost a year ago to the day, the SEC completely turned the college football world upside down when it was leaked that Texas and Oklahoma would exit the Big 12 once their contract was up in 2025 and they would join the SEC. And since then, so many changes have happened. But is the SEC trying to close Pandora's box that they actually opened? I want to break down all of the storylines of conference realignment on today's edition of Locked On LSU.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Caroline Fenton, and I'm your host every day. I graduated from LSU in 2019, covered the Tigers for my 4 years at LSU, and I'm now a sports talk radio host in Nashville, Tennessee. But since the announcement, I'll go all the way back to last year. Last year around SEC Media Days, about this time last year, it was leaked that Texas and Oklahoma would join the SEC in 2025. And since then, the proposal of a college football playoff expansion was turned down because I think that a lot of other school presidents and ADs and conference commissioners saw that as the SEC's way of getting more teams in with an expanded playoff. So that was shut down. So that kind of changed the course of college football. And then, of course, the most recent news that USC and UCLA would join the Big Ten. And all of the conversation about that since then has been, okay, who's next? Because it seemed to be a battle between the SEC and the Big Ten, and it was going to be constant and quick and rapid expansion. And the SEC and the Big Ten were like two hungry hippos that were just swallowing up every single program that they could get until college football was almost unrecognizable. I mean, it almost got to that extent. The conversation of anything is on the table. Because if USC and UCLA are going to be at a conference with primarily Midwestern schools, then geography doesn't matter anymore. So nothing is off the table. You know, a 2014 Big Ten sounds crazy, but that wasn't off the table. That was actually a pretty rational explanation or prediction for what was going to happen next in college football. This is Mike Greenberg on Monday on his show Greeny on ESPN Radio, kind of giving his predictions for the next big wave in college football.
USC and UCLA are the West Coast of college football, to be clear, historically. And maybe in recent years, Oregon has been better and Stanford's had good years. A lot of teams in the Pac-12 that are good. Washington has been really good over much of the last 20 years. But from a brand perspective, the West Coast of college football is USC and UCLA. And so when you lose that, it's over. So what we are now clearly heading towards, this is my reaction to all of this, what we are now hurtling toward is a world in which there are either 2 or 3 conferences, call them whatever you want. You want to call them super conferences, call them whatever you want. College football as we know it will be divided into 2 or 3 divisions.
Okay, so Mike Greenberg basically broke down everything that I thought, pretty much every prediction that I had in the subsequent days following the announcement that USC and UCLA would join the Big Ten. Because I thought, okay, here we go, buckle up everyone, because now it's a race for money. Now it's a race to get as many high-end, top-dollar college football programs in your conference. Pack them full with 16, 20 to 24 teams each. It's going to be the Big Ten and the SEC. They're going to break away into a conference of their own, so on and so forth. I mean, my mind, and probably yours too, was going to all of these different scenarios and all of these different places where college football could go. But I want to break down what we now know, because I think some of those conversations have kind of chilled out a little bit. And there have been people off the record and on the record both speaking about what the future holds. So what do we know now? Texas and Oklahoma will join the SEC at the moment at 2025 because that is when their rights with the Big 12, their contract is up. Now, they would have to pay a fine to get out of the Big 12 early, but my prediction personally, and this is just a prediction, it's not based on any sort of fact, I think that Texas and Oklahoma are going to join the SEC in 2024 whenever the SEC's deal with ESPN kicks in. Just a prediction, but that's what I think is going to happen. We know for certain, though, that Texas and Oklahoma will be in the SEC at least by 2025. We know that. USC and UCLA will do the same. Their rights deal with the Pac-12 is up in 2025, so that is when they are free to join the Big Ten. Could it be earlier? Maybe. I don't know. But that's what we know, that those 4 teams will join their new respective conferences at least by 2025, if not earlier. So what Greeny just laid out and what we think, at least what I think, and probably you have at least thought over the past couple of days is, okay, who's next? Because I looked at North Carolina, Virginia or Virginia Tech, Miami, Clemson. I looked at those to be pretty obvious additions to the SEC. That the SEC strikes, the Big Ten strikes back. So what's the SEC's next move? And I thought the natural move would be digging into the ACC. At least that makes the most geographical sense. And also adding new markets in North Carolina and Virginia, adding a football powerhouse in Clemson, and very reputable programs with rich traditions in Florida State and Miami. And I also thought that the rest of the ACC, let's say Duke or Wake Forest or Boston College, those seemed like easy fits into the Big Ten. So that was going to be the next move, that the ACC would divide and conquer between the SEC and the Big Ten, and then your super conferences start to form. But we know that might take a little bit of a halt. So what was the next thing that we learned? Well, the ACC and the Pac-12 could potentially join forces and kind of feed off of the ACC's deal with ESPN, because the ACC, it would be incredibly difficult, not impossible, but would be incredibly difficult to break up away from the ACC because their rights deal with ESPN is in existence until 2036. So I don't know exactly what that would look like in order to break that deal, but it would be lengthy and it would be expensive and it would be incredibly risky. So we know that. So the ACC and the Pac-12 idea, that partnership came about where the two conferences would quote unquote join. It would still be separate conferences, but they would have a joint TV deal. So there might be some crossover Pac-12 ACC games, and that would benefit the Pac-12 and ESPN. That would be the most comfortable move for the Pac-12 because the Pac-12 could stay intact without USC and UCLA. It can't exist now, in my opinion. It cannot exist now without USC and UCLA, just like Greeny just laid out in that clip, because USC and UCLA are West Coast football. And the Pac-12 will not survive its future television deals without USC and UCLA. The Pac-12 currently pays its member schools the least out of any Power 5 conference. I look at the SEC, whose each member school made $53 million last year. The Big Ten, $46 million to each member school in 2021. And obviously, those numbers are only going to go up over the years when those new deals kick in. 12 paid each of its member schools around $19 million. So a massive drop off, less than half of what the SEC and the Big Ten are going to make. And without your two, you could argue, your two most attractive schools in the most attractive market in that conference, that number is only going to go down further and further. So this deal would benefit ESPN because it would acquire Pac-12 rights. This deal would help out the Pac-12 because it gives them stability, both financially and football-wise. The ACC, the only thing really in their corner would be more fun matchups. It would be an Oregon-Clemson matchup, which would be a blast. But how advantageous is that really for the ACC? Because I think the ACC is sitting back and saying, okay, look, we're going to make some sort of move. We don't know when it's going to be. We don't know if we are going to have to write out this rights deal with ESPN. I lean that they probably will, because I don't see why ESPN will want to get out of that deal. But I see why the ACC and its member schools might want to get out of it. But I don't really see any advantage for the ACC to partner with the Pac-12. I mean, it would really just be point acquiring dead weight. I mean, schools like Washington State or Colorado, that's not an attractive acquisition for the ACC. A partnership with the SEC or the Big Ten. Now that's an attractive acquisition or partnership for member schools with the ACC. So that's another kind of subset of conference realignment that has come out is the ACC and the Pac-12. But since then, there have been two big time bombs dropped by two big time contributors in all of this conference realignment. And I want to get into those coming up next. But before I do that, I want to tell you about Rock Auto. So there's so many different kinds of makes and models for cars out there. So it's almost impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all of the parts that you need for your car. Plus, I hate having to wait in line at a local chain auto parts store and kind of go through all that intimidating questioning. I don't know what kind of brakes my car needs. I don't know what kind of oil my car needs. I probably should know that, but I just don't. And I don't want to have to wait while the person behind the corner orders the parts that I need for my car on their computer when I have a computer myself. You have a computer with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket, so save yourself some time and money when using Rock Auto. Why choose to spend 30%, 50%, even 100% more for the exact same parts for your car at a chain auto parts store or car dealership when you can get them at Rock Auto? So for example, for a Honda Odyssey, if that's the car that you drive, a fuel pump at an average local chain auto parts store could be around $350, but it's only around $200 at Rock Auto. So don't pay more for what you can get, the exact same part at Rock Auto. The prices are reliably low for every customer at Rock Auto. So go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Rate Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. They've got an amazing selection, reliably low prices, and all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Also, which NFL stars move the betting lines the most? Starting July 18th, Locked On gives you the 50 most valuable players in the NFL from the odds makers at BetOnline. Available July 18th on Locked On NFL wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. So there have been so many conversations and topics and interesting avenues that we've gone down since USC and UCLA decided to join the Big Ten. And it's what comes next for college football. And the biggest players in this conversation of conference realignment. Of course, the ACC is important in all of this. And of course, the Pac-12 is important in all of this. And the Big 12 is important as well. But I think the three key players are obviously the Big Ten. They're the ones most closely involved in this move. The SEC, because that's the conference that is going to, be the second super conference. That is the conference that started all of this realignment essentially. And the third one is Notre Dame. Because Notre Dame is sitting pretty right now. Notre Dame is the prettiest girl at the party, the coolest guy without a prom date, is whatever analogy that you want to use. Notre Dame is sitting pretty and is the most attractive team left that has no affiliation with the conference. So it came out earlier this week from a spokesperson to Sports Illustrated's Pat Forty. So the article says it's a source with knowledge of the school's plans. I don't know exactly what that means. Is that a school exec? Is that an insider? I don't know exactly what that means. But in a nutshell, the source with knowledge close to the school's plans says that Notre Dame is, quote, in no rush to join a conference. Says that independence remains the preference and the leader in the clubhouse. It'll take a lot to move Notre Dame off its cherished identity, but the instability of the entire landscape remains a concern and could further affect the Irish outlook. Okay. Admittedly, pretty sure I shared this on the podcast. I thought this from the very beginning, that Notre Dame would feel zero rush and no pressure whatsoever to join a conference right now. Because why would they? Look at they have no college football playoff incentive to join a conference because right now the college football playoff has no affiliation to a conference. Notre Dame's been in the college football playoff twice, I believe. They haven't joined a conference. And the college football playoff expansion could incentivize Notre Dame down the line if it expands to a 12-team playoff. The model that was presented was that the conference champions, the top 4 conference champions, would each receive a week 1 bye. Now, that would, even if Notre Dame is the absolute best team in the country, if they are unanimous number 1, undefeated, so on and so forth, they would not receive that first round bye because they don't have a conference affiliation. Let's say, hypothetically, a 3-loss Clemson team wins the ACC. Clemson would get a first round bye, and Notre Dame, hypothetically, an undefeated team, would not. So that is a disadvantage. A disadvantage to push Notre Dame to join a conference. We'll see once conference expansion happens. Not if, but when. Because I think it's inevitable at this point. So right now, no college football playoff incentive to join a conference. So why would they? The second reason why Notre Dame probably would not join a conference is because of money. Unless they feel a push to, financially to join a conference, they really have no need. At this point, Notre Dame is getting $15 million a year from NBC through 2025. They're also receiving about $11 million a year from the ACC for those few ACC games that they do have. So you're looking at about $30 million or less that Notre Dame is getting for the rights to their games. Now, take it with a grain of salt because Notre Dame is an institution, so it's incredibly difficult to try and find, specific facts and numbers about the money that's coming into Notre Dame. But I think that's kind of a fair baseline, is $30 million-ish for Notre Dame. So I mentioned this earlier, but SEC in 2021 got $53 million from their TV rights deals. The Big Ten got $46 million from their TV rights deals. So you're looking at almost double what Notre Dame is making. Now, Notre Dame's deal with NBC expires also in 2025. 2025 is a very important year in terms of realignment and also networks. Because Notre Dame can renegotiate that deal with NBC and get a lot more money from NBC and then still feel no pressure to join a conference because they're raking in dough from NBC. It all depends on how that deal gets renegotiated, because I don't think that Notre Dame is going to make any move until at least 2025 when their deal with NBC is up. But that brings another hitch in the plan, and another reason why they probably wouldn't join a conference right now is, remember that deal that I talked about that the ACC has with ESPN through 2036, so 14 more years? Well, Notre Dame's kind of involved in that as well. They're getting about $11 million a year from the ACC. All sports except football are affiliated with the ACC. And of course, Notre Dame has those few games a year that they play against ACC teams. So while they're not formally a member of the ACC, they're still connected in some form or fashion to that TV deal through 2036. So that would still leave them subject to a fine if they want to disaffiliate from the ACC. Now, I have to think that it probably wouldn't be as high as, say, a Clemson or a Florida State, teams that are, permanent, solidified members of the ACC, but it would still be some sort of financial hit to Notre Dame if they decided to completely pull apart from the ACC and join, let's say, the Big Ten, for example. So I don't see any situation in which Notre Dame is going to join a conference, and I think that would be the biggest catalyst in super conferences, is, let's say, if Notre Dame does join the Big Ten, hypothetically, that would give a huge push to the SEC to add even more heavy hitters into the conference, even more moneymakers into the conference. But as long as Notre Dame is staying pat, I think several other schools and other conferences will stay pat as well. Notre Dame is the biggest cash cow left out there. And you could look at Oregon or Clemson or Washington or Florida State or Miami, some of those schools that are also big-time cash cows. But Notre Dame is undoubtedly the most attractive team out there without a home. I think the only way that Notre Dame would join a conference is if these super conferences do come to fruition. That if the Big Ten and the SEC have 20 to 24 members. But also, I don't think that super conferences are going to happen until Notre Dame makes their move. So it's kind of like a chicken and egg situation. I think Notre Dame is staying pat. So I think that kind of makes all of these other schools stay pat as well. And I feel that I changed my mind since about a week ago, because that's when Notre Dame came out and said that they had no rush to join a conference. So what does that mean for the SEC? Because I said that there were two bombs dropped since the news about the ACC and the Pac-12 potential partnership. Notre Dame feeling no pressure to join a conference being one of them. And one of them involves the SEC. So what does that mean for the future of the SEC and the future of conference realignment? I want to get into that coming up next. But before we do that, I want to tell you about Built Bar. So the people who invented healthy and tasty comes the latest gift to your taste buds. So you've probably heard about the amazing coconut brownie chunk Built Bar. It's one of my favorites, but guess what? If you're a fan of the puffs, then you're in luck, because Built has given coconut brownie chunk the puffs treatment. Coconut brownie chunk Built Bar flavor you love in a deliciously chewy, super light and fluffy marshmallow. And of course, like all Built Bars, it's covered in 100% real chocolate. It's like a fluffy cloud of coconut brownie goodness. It is so delicious. But stop drooling, stop fantasizing about them, and listen, because they're good for you as well. They're low calorie, low sugar, high protein, and they're all delicious. The coconut brownie chunk puffs are only here for a limited time, so go to Built.com right now to make sure that you don't miss out on all the deliciousness, because they're going fast and they taste amazing. All Built Bars are made with collagen protein, so your body absorbs collagen protein more efficiently. It also helps your hair, your skin, your nails be a lot healthier, and it provides a ton of health benefits. So it tastes delicious, it tastes like a dessert, and it's good for you. So it's the best of both worlds. The best part of Built Puffs is, of course, they taste amazing, but you can enjoy them guilt-free because they're good for you. They're the perfect treat when you've got a craving, you need to satisfy your sweet tooth, or if you need a quick, healthy snack, they're an excellent source of protein on the go. Delicious coconut-rich, sweet, brownie, creamy marshmallow. Stop fantasizing. Go to Built.com to order your box of coconut brownie chunk Built Puffs right now. Go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKED15, and get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15. So the ACC and the Pac-12, there was, news floating around that they could join, have a potential partnership. I don't really foresee that happening. Then the news was dropped from an insider who's close to Notre Dame football, said Notre Dame doesn't feel any pressure to join a conference right now. Okay, that changes things, because Notre Dame is the biggest player without a home right now. So what's next for the SEC? There was some news dropped per Matt Hayes of Saturday Down South, who spoke to an athletic director, an SEC athletic director, who said, we're positioned at 16 teams for a robust future. 16 teams. So that's Texas and Oklahoma and no more. The athletic director goes on to say the need just isn't there. So, and it was also Matt Hayes, again, of Saturday Down South, went on to ask if Notre Dame joining the Big Ten would be a threatening move. And the SEC athletic director said, why? I'll put our product versus anyone's product, so we're going to just add schools to add schools. There is no value in that. So I hear that and an eyebrow raised, because I don't know if I necessarily believe that athletic director. Do they actually feel that secure in where the SEC is right now? If Notre Dame is stagnant, are there no moves that they want to make? That would be fair. If the ACC is locked into their contract through 2036, just reevaluate then. Because the SEC can't go to Clemson, Miami, Florida State, North Carolina, Virginia, any of these schools in the ACC and say, hey, we want you. Let's figure out a deal. That's illegal. That is tortious interference, is a phrase that I learned today, which essentially means that one party intentionally interferes or damages a contract or contractual agreement or business relationship with another party, causing economic harm. So that is exactly what that would be. The SEC would be violating the law by going to the ACC and saying, hey, Clemson, we want you. So break your deal with ESPN. You should come to the SEC because you'll make more money here. You'll be more relevant here. The SEC can't do that. So hearing that phrase or hearing that quote from an SEC athletic director makes me think that that's really just to cover their butts for right now. Because you cannot tell me that if Notre Dame joins the Big Ten, that all of these presidents and chancellors and directors will be looking at you to say, okay, what next? Because we don't want to be left behind. And I've said it once, and I'll reiterate this. I don't see a scenario in which the SEC does get left behind. I don't think that'll happen when you have programs like Georgia, Florida, Alabama, LSU, Tennessee, Texas A&M. I mean, you know it well enough that I don't have to explain it to you, that the future of college football, the SEC is involved. But this isn't necessarily about dominance on the field. This is about money. And Notre Dame joining the Big Ten makes the Big Ten so much more valuable financially, and, we can even argue on the field as well. So I raised an eyebrow when I heard that. And then when I was reading an article in ESPN, on ESPN.com, and I highly recommend that you check this out. It's about kind of all the behind-the-scenes goings-on about USC and UCLA. A Big Ten source said, no one wants the land from under them to be pulled out. So everyone has to be nimble. One day you might be saying one thing, and you mean it from the bottom of your heart. And the next day you have to flip based on economics, based on governance, based on something. So you mean it from the bottom of your heart. Yeah, right. Give me a break. People will say a lot of things to cover their butts, to do what's best for business, and then they can completely do a 180 the next day and claim that it's best for everyone involved, best for the conference, best for the schools, best for whatever that might be. So I read that quote from Big Ten source, and I think back to that quote from an SEC athletic director. We're fine with 16 teams. The need's not there to expand. Well, you might feel like that today. You might feel like that while you're in the driver's seat as an SEC member. But once that changes, that feeling is going to change. I think one thing that we have learned from all of this college football talk and all of this conference realignment scenarios, things can change in a heartbeat. Blink your eyes and something changes. So I take all of these things with a grain of salt. And while I hear that SEC athletic director saying that now, they don't have ultimate say. If Greg Sankey wants to expand, Greg Sankey can expand. They might not just see the value in it right now because other schools might be handicapped, or the SEC might not be interested in bringing in Oregon or Washington because they don't see either the economic value in that, or that's really all it would be is economic value at this point. Those are the only moves that are happening. But I hear that and I think about that for now. But what about tomorrow? What about next week? What about 2030 or 2025 when a lot of these rights deals are up? What about 2036 whenever the ACC's deal with ESPN comes up? What about the day that the ACC or ACC members try and break away from those rights deals with ESPN? You cannot tell me then that the SEC is content with 16 teams. So keeping an eye on all of that with conference realignment, because all of it undoubtedly affects the SEC, and all of it would undoubtedly affect LSU. And I've said this before, and I'll reiterate it, that no matter what happens with conference realignment, LSU is going to be included. The SEC is going to be included. So all this would really affect with LSU is who do they play every year? What's their path to a conference championship? What's their path to a college football championship? What's the financial gain? How does that affect recruiting? All of those things, of course, change with conference realignment and with the SEC potentially acquiring more members. But the most important thing at this point is that LSU is safe and that the SEC for now is content with 16 teams. But I emphasize the for now element of that. But we'll continue to focus on that, and that is going to do it for me today. But thank y'all for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. You make your second listen Locked On SEC. You can get more on the SEC by making Locked On SEC your second listen. Every day, host Chris Gordy and the local experts of Locked On take you across the SEC in 30 minutes.